Imagine hearing that your hero is gone, and suddenly nothing makes sense anymore. The world feels upside down, colors drain away, time moves differently. For Jesus' disciples, those 3 days felt like waking up in a world where history had stopped. No answers, no hope, just heartbreak stretching endlessly into the unknown. Picture this. You've built your entire life around someone. Every decision, every dream, every moment of purpose flows from their vision. Then, in an instant, they're gone. Not just absent, utterly destroyed before your eyes. That's what those followers experienced. They didn't just lose a teacher. They lost their compass, their future, their very reason for being. Those 72 hours shook everything to the core. It was like their life's GPS had gone dark, roads disappeared, destinations vanished, and they found themselves stranded in a wilderness of confusion. And yet, somehow, buried beneath the devastation, they still believed he would rise. Again. But the truth is, no one, not even them, could grasp what was about to unfold. The magnitude, the cosmic shift, the complete rewriting of reality itself. You might be wondering, why does this matter to me? Why should I care about something that happened 2,000 years ago? Because those blank days rewrote reality. Not just for them, but for anyone who's ever lost direction, felt invisible, or believed in something impossible. If you've ever hit rock bottom and thought it was over, if you've ever stared into the abyss and wondered if morning would ever come, this story is for you. When Jesus died, the pain struck like lightning, and it wasn't just spiritual. It was gut-wrenching, raw, primal, confusion mixed with horror, mixed with a sense of ultimate betrayal. His followers weren't seasoned warriors prepared for battle. They were regular people, fishermen and tax collectors, facing something extraordinary that no training could have prepared them for. Peter wept until his eyes were swollen shut. Mary Magdalene drifted through the streets like a ghost, her world suddenly empty of meaning. Thomas questioned everything he'd ever believed, every miracle he'd witnessed, every word he'd heard. The other disciples huddled together, sharing their bewilderment and growing terror. It was like a legendary athlete vanishing overnight without explanation. Think Michael Jordan disappearing at the height of his career, or Pelé suddenly ceasing to exist. Fans don't just forget the records, the games. Everything feels empty. The sport itself loses meaning. That's how the disciples felt, but magnified beyond comprehension. They didn't just lose a leader. They lost their identity, their mission, their understanding of good and evil itself. The political implications were staggering. Roman authorities breathed easier, one less revolutionary to worry about. Jewish leaders felt vindicated, but also strangely hollow. The crowds who had shouted, "Hosanna!" just days before now, scattered like leaves in the wind, embarrassed by their enthusiasm, confused by their emotions. They locked themselves away, doors shut, not just to hide from persecution, but to contain their grief, to process the unthinkable. Rumors spread like wildfire through Jerusalem's narrow streets. Did someone steal the body? Was his spirit still wandering around? Did the Romans have a backup plan? Was this all part of some elaborate political theater? So many questions, no answers, only the deafening silence of shattered dreams. Those 3 days were a spiritual blackout, a human abyss filled with nothing but sorrow, speculation, and paralyzing fear. Even the sun seemed dimmer. Even the temple felt hollow. But while the visible world mourned, something unprecedented was happening in the invisible realm. Then, the light around the tomb began to dim. Shadowy figures emerged from dimensions beyond human perception. Time itself seemed to slow, bend, accommodate something extraordinary. A pulse, quiet and spiritual, began to rise from the depths of existence. Souls once trapped in the shadowlands of death, now stirring with new possibility. According to ancient writings cited by Peter and Paul, Jesus descended into Sheol, not as a defeated victim, but as a conquering liberator. He walked among the dead, proclaiming freedom to captives who had waited centuries for this moment, not as myth, but as fulfillment of promises whispered since the dawn of time. A quiet, cosmic restorative mission unfolding in realms most humans never imagine. Picture this. Imagine an astronaut entering a black hole, not to vanish into nothingness, but to deliver a rescue message to those stranded within the event horizon. Against all odds, against all scientific understanding, he returns, changed, transformed, victorious, carrying with him not just survival, but evidence of realities beyond our wildest dreams. That was the silent power of those hidden hours. Abraham, Moses, David, generations of faithful souls suddenly encountered the fulfillment of everything they'd hoped for. The promise made to Adam and Eve in the garden, the covenant sworn to Abraham under the stars, the vision glimpsed by Isaiah in the temple, all of it converging in this moment of cosmic rescue. In the darkness of death, a spiritual rescue mission was unfolding, invisible to human eyes, untold in newspaper headlines, but transformative beyond measure. And then came the third day. The tomb, what seemed like the final chapter, the ultimate period at the end of Hope's sentence, became the turning point of the greatest story ever told. Jesus didn't just return alive, he returned, transformed. His body bore the scars but radiated power. His presence carried both familiarity and otherworldly authority. The disciples didn't just recover from their trauma, they stepped into a purpose larger than they'd ever imagined possible. Think of the smartphone revolution, not just another gadget in a long line of technological improvements, but the catalyst for a completely new era of human connection. That stone rolling away wasn't just symbolic, it was the inaugural moment of a new age, the first domino in a sequence that would reshape civilization itself. Mary Magdalene arrived at dawn, expecting to perform the final rituals of grief. Instead, she became the first witness to resurrection. Her tears of sorrow transformed into tears of overwhelming joy. Her whispered Rabboni became the first word of a new vocabulary of hope. When the other disciples arrived, they found not a corpse, but evidence of victory. The grave clothes lay folded, purposeful, like someone had calmly prepared for a journey rather than desperately escaped from death. The stone wasn't just moved. It was positioned as if by invisible hands that had no concern for Roman seals or human impossibilities. When Jesus rose, the disciples didn't retreat into comfortable privacy. They went forward into dangerous publicity. Peter, who had denied knowing Jesus just days before, now preached boldly to thousands. They faced persecution with joy, traveled to the ends of the known world with a message that could get them killed, all because of one unshakable belief: death couldn't hold him, and therefore death couldn't hold anyone who belonged to him. That third day sparked a movement unlike anything the world had ever seen. Grief transformed into gospel, fear metamorphosed into passionate courage, silence exploded into spiritual fire that would burn across continents and centuries. After the resurrection, they scattered across the world like seeds on the wind, but the message remained constant, unified, unstoppable. He is risen. Communities formed wherever they went. Hermits became preachers, cowards became martyrs. Lives were transformed not by philosophy or self-help techniques, but by encounter with living hope. Paul's letters, written decades later, were still infused with that same three-day power. His words to the Corinthians: "If Christ has not been raised, our preaching is useless, and so is your faith." But Christ had been raised, and therefore everything changed. Every assumption about reality, every understanding of human potential, every definition of victory and defeat, all rewritten by those 3 days. It's like a viral video, but more than just views and shares, it causes genuine action. People don't just watch, they participate. They gather in communities, they build hospitals and schools, they share resources and risks, they fundamentally change how they live. The resurrection didn't just go viral, it went transformational. That belief in resurrection altered the entire trajectory of Western civilization. Hospitals, originally built to care for the poor and sick without regard for social status. Schools, designed to educate everyone, not just the elite. Literature exploring themes of redemption, hope, second chances. Art celebrating human dignity as something created in the image of God. All shaped by a radical shift in understanding human value and potential that began in a garden with a rolled-away stone. The Roman Empire, which had seemed permanent and invincible, eventually bowed to a message that started with a small group of traumatized fishermen, kings and philosophers, artists and scientists, revolutionaries and peacemakers, all influenced by the implications of those quiet days that sparked centuries of impact. 3 days lit a fire that still burns today, in unexpected places, in ordinary people who discover extraordinary purpose. Before all that, death was universally seen as the end, final, irreversible, absolute. First-century Jews believed in Sheol, a shadowy realm where the dead waited in semi-conscious existence. Resurrection, theoretically, possible, but rare as a miracle, and only expected at the end of time when God would judge all humanity. Greek philosophers spoke of the soul's immortality, but viewed the body as a prison to be escaped, not redeemed. Romans built monuments to preserve memory but held no hope for actual return from death. Other religions offered reincarnation cycles, but not the restoration of this particular life, this specific identity, this unique combination of body and soul. The disciples had followed a teacher who embodied eternal truth. They believed in him because he lived what he preached with perfect consistency. His words matched his actions. His promises aligned with his character. His love proved itself in sacrifice. But when he died, so did their hope. Despite his predictions, despite his explanations, no one expected him to return. Death was still death. Tombs were still final. And the first witnesses were women, unexpected voices in a culture that often silenced them, that didn't accept their testimony in legal proceedings, that relegated them to secondary status in religious matters. A twist that broke every rule, challenged every assumption, reversed every expectation. If this were a fabricated story, the inventors would have chosen more credible witnesses. The fact that women were first tells us something profound about God's values and the authenticity of the account. Imagine if your university professor, a bold voice for change, someone who challenged systems and inspired students, suddenly passed away in a controversial public execution. A week later, that same professor reappears, not just alive, but transformed, not just surviving, but proving something bigger about the nature of reality itself. That would change everything, your understanding of death, of justice, of possibility, of what education even means. Paul and Peter didn't spread myths or wishful thinking. They spoke of real encounters with a risen Jesus, real conversations, real meals shared, real scars touched, real memories created after death had supposedly ended everything. Over 500 witnesses saw him alive, according to Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Over half of those witnesses eventually died for their testimonies, choosing execution over recantation. People don't die for fairy tales they know they invented. They might die for sincere beliefs later proven wrong, but not for deliberate lies that benefit no one. These disciples gained nothing worldly from their claims. Instead, they lost security, comfort, acceptance, and ultimately their lives. Something real happened. Something so undeniably powerful that it was worth dying to defend. The transformation in the disciples themselves provides evidence. Peter went from denying he knew Jesus to boldly preaching about him in the same city where Jesus had been executed. Thomas went from expressing doubt to reportedly traveling to India to share the message. James, Jesus' own brother, who had been skeptical during his lifetime, became a leader in the early church. These weren't gradual shifts in opinion. They were radical reversals that demand explanation. Historical details support the accounts. The timing aligned with Passover, when Jerusalem was crowded with pilgrims who could verify or deny the claims. The location was public, not hidden. The authorities had every motivation to produce the body and end the movement before it started. Instead, they could only accuse the disciples of stealing the corpse, an accusation that raises more questions than it answers. Jesus' death and return weren't accidents or improvised responses to unexpected circumstances. They fulfilled ancient prophecy with stunning precision. Psalm 16:10 declared, "You will not abandon me to the realm of the dead, nor will you let your faithful one see decay." Written centuries before crucifixion was even invented as a method of execution. Isaiah spoke of a suffering servant who would be pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities, but who would also see the light of life and be satisfied. Jonah's 3 days in the fish became a prophetic shadow of what was to come. Death, swallowing the innocent, then being forced to release them transformed. Jesus himself had predicted it repeatedly. "Destroy this temple, and I will raise it in 3 days," he said, speaking of his body as the true temple. He declared in the synagogue, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing," connecting his mission to centuries of prophetic preparation. This wasn't defeat that somehow got spun into victory. It was the activation of destiny, the fulfillment of a plan laid before the foundation of the world. With that resurrection, apparent betrayal turned into ultimate victory. Those 3 days weren't narrative gaps or embarrassing silences in the story. They were the key chapters of a divine script written before time began, performed on the stage of history for the redemption of the world. Theologically, resurrection bridges the gap between human and divine in ways no other concept can. Death loses its ultimate grip on human destiny. Faith is no longer abstract philosophy floating in theoretical clouds. It's grounded in historical fact, anchored in time and space, and eyewitness testimony. For believers, those 3 days prove that death is just a doorway, not a dead end. Physical existence has eternal significance. The body isn't a prison to escape, but a temple to be redeemed. Suffering has meaning because it can be transformed. Hope isn't wishful thinking, but confident expectation based on demonstrated power over the ultimate enemy. The implications ripple through every aspect of human experience. If Jesus rose from the dead, then his claims about forgiveness have weight. His promises about eternal life carry authority. His teachings about love and justice aren't just good ideas, but divine imperatives backed by resurrection power. On a personal level, they speak directly to grief, loss, failure, and the human experience of endings that feel final. Imagine losing someone you love deeply. At first, silence takes over, numbness, the feeling that life has lost its color and meaning, but slowly, mysteriously, memories begin to comfort rather than torment. Community provides strength. Faith offers perspective. What once felt like a void becomes the space for transformation, for new growth, for different kinds of love. That hope inspired practical action throughout history. Hospitals for the poor, built because resurrection dignity applies to everyone. Universities for the curious, founded because truth matters eternally. Art that celebrated human potential. Literature that explored redemption themes. Music that lifted spirits toward transcendence. Resurrection wasn't just spiritual comfort, it was societal transformation. Imagine a startup that collapses spectacularly one week. Investors flee, employees scatter, the media writes obituaries, but then the founders pivot, discover something revolutionary, and return stronger than ever. The death of the old vision becomes the seed for a global movement that transforms entire industries. That's what happened with the early church. What looked like complete failure, their leader executed as a criminal, their movement shattered, their hopes destroyed, became the foundation for the most influential organization in human history, not through political power or military conquest, but through the simple, impossible claim that death had been defeated. The disciples went from hiding in fear to traveling the world with a message that would get them killed. They planted communities that outlasted empires. They preserved and transmitted ideas that shaped law, ethics, education, and human rights. They turned suffering into service, persecution into purpose, endings into beginnings. Those 3 days, they're not just religious history gathering dust in theological libraries. They're a roadmap for anyone who's ever faced darkness and wondered if light would return. They're proof that darkness doesn't have the last word in any story, that purpose can rise again from the ashes of defeat, that you can carry that light into your own silent nights and empty tombs. If you've ever faced a moment that felt like the end, the death of a dream, the loss of a relationship, the failure of a plan you'd invested everything in, hear this. It's not over. The story that began in that tomb 2,000 years ago continues through you. Your current Friday doesn't define your Sunday. Your present darkness doesn't determine your future dawn. The same power that raised Jesus from the dead is available to raise dead dreams, dead hopes, dead possibilities in your life. Not through magic or wishful thinking, but through the same patient process of death leading to transformation, leading to resurrection, that has been God's pattern from the beginning. You might be in your own 3 days right now, that space between tragedy and triumph, between burial and resurrection, between the end of one story and the beginning of another. Don't rush through it. Don't try to skip to the victory without experiencing the victory. Those dark hours, those silent days, those empty spaces, they're not wasted time. They're preparation time, transformation time, resurrection time. The tomb is never the end of the story. It's just the pause before the most amazing chapter begins.